.NET for Devices presents EvenTiles Part 15, the About Page UI. Hello once again. So today we're going to talk about how to create the About page, and we're going to use Expression Blend for that. So from within Visual Studio I'm now going to open that About page inside Expression Blend. So we're just going to wait until the page is visible. And here is the page, so let me make sure to get it entirely inside my Expression Blend design surface. And we're going to just create a typical About page here. So what I want to have is information about the application, but I also want to have a couple of buttons on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to work in the content panel, which is a data grid. And the first thing I'm going to do, because I want to have things nicely laid out inside that data grid, is add a number of row definitions. I'm going to start with 2 row definitions. The first one is going to be of automatic height, and the second one is going to fill up the remainder of the screen. And with that, what we're going to do is add our first UI control to the About box, and that first UI control is going to be a border, because I want to have a nice separation between some information and some additional information. So here is the border already visible there, and what we're going to do initially is set that border to an auto size. We're going to fill the entire surface, and now we have a nice large border here. We're going to fix that later. And what I also want to do is make sure to get some margins right on the border. And if I set the left and right margin both to 12 pixels, then I have a nice lineup with the title inside the About page. And actually Jeff Wilcox wrote a nice blog entry about it, and in the written part of EvenTiles, so in the written part number 15, I have a link to that particular blog entry as well. What I also want to do is change the color of that border, and we're going to make use of the phone accent brush. So we are making use of a predefined brush here, and we're going to make that border a little bit thicker as well. Making use of an accent brush here is kind of cool, because if users change the theme inside their phone, our color will change accordingly for this particular border. So that is all very, very nice actually, because we don't have to do anything about that and yet get the same colors that the user actually has a preference for. Now inside the border I want to add another grid, and that grid is going to be the placeholder for a number of text blocks. And in order to have those nicely laid out on the screen again, what we're going to do is sort of a similar action we did already before. So we're going to add a number of row definitions, and we're going to add a number of column definitions this time. And since I want to have 4 elements there, I'm going to add 4 row definitions. So what that also means is that basically we're going to get 4 automatic rows here of automatic height, and they will all going to be a placeholder for a text block. The same is going to be true in the second column, so I'm going to create an additional column here as well. And initially let's just lay out those columns evenly over our grid there, and you can see that already with a line indicating our columns there. Since you don't see anything for our rows, well, that makes sense, because we made them of automatic height and they don't have anything in them yet. So what I'm going to do now is create one text block. And I'm going to make sure that the text block's parent is the grid we just created. What I also want to do on that text block is make sure that it's filling up the entire space it has available inside its column and inside its row there. And the other thing we want to do is also make sure that that text block will have a particular style, and by just applying a resource being a phone text normal style, what's going to happen is that automatically we set our margin to 12 pixels. So again, we have a very nice layout inside our Windows Phone page just by making use of that style. And using that style has another advantage, because if that style changes to give phones another look and feel, we don't have to change anything inside our own code. I already gave the text property of that text block the name, and I'm just going to copy that text block a couple of times. And copying means that also that I need to set different rows there, because I want to have each text block defined in its own row. So what we have is 4 text blocks on top of each other, and of course I also want to change the text properties of those particular text blocks as well. And copying them made a lot of sense actually, because in that way I also have that automatic style inserted in all those copies of those text blocks. So we're going to have one with version, and to the right of that we're going to show the version number of the application. We have a copyright indicator there, and finally we will also show some contact information. And then in the right hand column we're also going to show a couple of text blocks. So what we're going to do right now is just make a copy of all these text blocks, and we're just going to copy them underneath here in that same grid, of course. And what we're going to do with one change is make sure that we are now showing those in column number 1. Since the row numbers are still correctly, because we made a copy here, we don't have to do anything on those. And we're going to make sure to set the foreground color of those text blocks to again the accent color on the phone. So just like that border that we have available, the text blocks there are going to have that same color. Now of course we need to change some properties on those text blocks. So the first one, we're going to change the text property on that particular text block, and we're going to change that into the name of the application being EvenTiles. For the second text block we're going to do something different. We're going to make that text property empty, but we're also going to give that particular text block a name so that we can fill out a version number for the application later on programmatically. And then our copyright information, we're going to just change the text property there again, so that's going to be .NET for devices. And then finally we're also going to change the last text block in the right hand column, and we're going to just give an email address there for contact information. Now as you can see, something is wrong there, because our email address is a little bit too large, or in other words that column in which it's located is a little bit too small. So what I want to do is extend the size, the width of that column a little bit, and therefore we select our grid and we're just going to go to our column definitions there. And instead of dividing the column width evenly, our second column, we're just going to make that 1.5 times as large as the left hand column. And in that way our email address fits nicely on the screen as well. So with those relative layouts, they are just very powerful to create a wonderful Windows Phone page. Now since our border is too large, we need to fix that as well, and I just want to show you that we can change things in a graphical way, but also just immediately in XAML, also inside Expression Blend. So if we take a look at our border control, what you can see is that hey, our grid row is set to 1 instead of 0. So I'm going to change that to 0, because then it's going to be part of the first row inside our grid, and in that way what you can see is that our border control right now only occupies the space it is needing, and that's exactly what we want to have. So it's nicely displayed on top inside the About page right now, and the remaining area we're going to add some additional information there as well. So we're going to use yet another text block inside our context panel, and in order to get that text block nicely lined out, what we're going to do is just add a couple of rows here. And since we want to have, you know, like a nice amount of empty space between our text block and the border control, and then also between some buttons that we're going to add later on, what I'm going to do is in fact add 2 additional rows. That first row is going to be of automatic size, and the next row is again filling up the remaining space. So now I have 2 rows filling up the remaining space and 1 row occupying the size it is needing. And in that automatic row, what we're going to add is yet another text block. So I'm just gonna use that text block there that I just created. We're gonna put that inside our row number 2, and it's just gonna like appear right now there. I'm also gonna change the style there again, so we're gonna make use again of a font text normal style. Immediately you see that feedback there that we now have margins of 12, and we're just going to change the text property there. I'm going to enter some text, something like pin a secondary tile to the start screen, simply because it looks good. So that's kind of an explanation of what our application is doing. And of course, as you know, if you're following EvenTiles from the beginning, you know that the application itself is not doing much from a functionality point of view, but at least, it is showing you a number of techniques you can use if you are developing a Windows Phone application. Now what we're also going to do is add a couple of buttons, and we're going to make use of yet another number of rows inside our content panel to host those particular buttons. So what I want to have is 3 additional rows, and those rows should be displayed at the bottom side of our about page. So I'm quickly just simply gonna add 3 additional rows here, and those additional rows, they will be of height automatic, because making them height automatic, again, they just occupy the amount of space that is necessary for buttons there. So what we have then is 2 rows with size star, filling up the remaining content on our about page, and all the other rows are of size or height automatic. So I just quickly created 3 buttons. Those buttons are still initially located in row number 0. So what we're going to change is the row number of those buttons, and I'm also going to change the name of those particular buttons. With the first one, or the first button, it's going to be a button to email suggestions about EvenTiles. So I'm going to just call that button email, and we're going to change the content of that button later on, because we're going to do that in a special way. But I do want to make sure that that button fills up the entire width inside the grid, so we're just going to auto size it to fill. So now we're going to select the second button. We're again going to make sure that it will be located in the proper row, and we're going to give that a proper name as well. So the first thing we're going to do is find our row property. We're going to set that to 5, and immediately you can see that this button is laid out underneath the other button. We're going to set its size again to auto as well, because that is another thing that is important, because then we lose that margin and the button is again using the entire width inside the grid. Then we're going to change the name, and this time we're going to create a name like button review. So we're going to use this button for our users to submit a review about EvenTiles, and we're immediately going to change the content of the button into review EvenTiles as well. We're going to do something similar for the third button. It's going to be underneath the other 2 buttons, so it's going to be in row number 6 over there, and again we're going to make sure to auto size the button, and we're also going to change the content and the name of that particular button. So this button will be used to get more applications from .NET for Devices on Marketplace. So our content is also going to be more from .NET for Devices. Now the functionality for all those buttons is something we will implement in the next part of EvenTiles. So right now we're just concentrating on the user interface. And let's just work a little bit on that first button there, because in that button we just don't want to use the content property as is. But what I want to do there is add a stack panel to that button, and inside that stack panel what we're going to do is have a little text but also a little image available. In order to get that right, what we're going to do is on that stack panel we're going to set the orientation from vertical to horizontal, and then we're going to work on getting an image there as well. Also, we're going to make sure that the width and the height of the stack panel are set to auto, so they don't occupy more space than needed. And immediately you get visual feedback again, because the button now has hardly any height. So what we're going to do is insert an image control, and we're going to insert that image control to the stack panel, and immediately you see that image control appearing there. And we also want to give it a little image, and we're going to make use of a pre-installed image there. So I'm going to just make use of an email icon, and we're going to reuse an icon from the application bar. So it's going to be our email.png file. Now the image is a little large, so we need to fix that as well. So we're just gonna go to auto size, and we auto size both width and height, and that's a little better. Now still that button is a little larger than the other button, so that's something we want to fix later on as well. But first what we're gonna do is add yet another text block, and that text block should be positioned behind our little image inside the button, so it's gonna be part of that same stack panel. We're gonna make sure to center it nicely vertically together with the image. I'm also gonna make sure to change the style for that particular text block, and we're gonna make use of our normal style again, so we have some margin between the image and the text block. Then we need to change the text property, and what we're gonna set there is something like email feedback and or suggestions. And so now we have a button that just looks a little bit nicer than the other buttons, because it contains a few more elements inside the content area there, because we were making use of a stack panel to host both an image and a text box. What we're also gonna do right now is make sure that the other buttons get the same height. So I'm just gonna change the height in pixels to 86 for both buttons there. And then we are more or less done with the user interface for the About page. As you can see, like creating a user interface is quite some work. And of course we went through it step by step. And now from inside Expression Blend, I also wanna run the application, because that's possible. So we don't even have to go back to Visual Studio here. And I just builded the project, and now we're going to run the project. And from inside Expression Blend, what you can see now is that, hey, automatically our Windows Phone emulator was started, and we're now just going to wait for the application to appear, because it will be deployed from Expression Blend to the emulator. We're going to go quickly to the About page here, and what you can see nicely is that, hey, here is that About page. You can see the border control and the text inside that second column inside that border control, that they nicely are taking the theme from the phone. So in design mode we have some blue color there, but in running mode in this particular phone we have a nice red brush there. So we are following the theme of the user. And if we just terminate the application right now, what we can do is go back to Visual Studio, and if I'm just opening that same About page inside Visual Studio, what you will see is that, hey, the changes that we created using Expression Blend are already incorporated in that About page here, because we were saving and building that project. So what you can see is that there is great integration between Visual Studio and Expression Blend, with each tool having its own purpose. Expression Blend to create UIs, Visual Studio to create functionality, and in the next episode of EvenTiles we're going to continue working on functionality of this About page. So we're going to give our buttons some functionality, and we're going to add a version number. And with that we are at the end of this episode of EvenTiles. I know it was a lot of talking, it was a lot of viewing. I still hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you will tune in also to the next episode of EvenTiles.